of the Mayoral and City Council Commission on Tax Reform. We were appointed earlier in the summer and asked to make recommendations to improve the fairness, the transparency, and the clarity and simplicity of the tax system. And we have been holding public hearings around the city. This is the last public hearing for the fall. And really asking you all to tell us what are your concerns about the tax system, and also to suggest any solutions that you see or worries that you have about other people's proposed solutions. So we are charged with issuing a preliminary report in the winter, so January, February, early winter. And then we will be back to you to ask for your comments and concerns and improvements upon the preliminary report. So we'll be back to you next spring. And then we've been asked to issue a final report making recommendations to the City Council, the state legislature, about how to reform the property tax system over the summer. So I am going to ask each of the members of the commission to introduce themselves, starting on my right to Commissioner Jiha.
My name is Jacques Gia, and I'm the New York City Commissioner of Finance.
Francesco Brindisi, representing the Budget Director.
James Parrott, Director of Economic and Fiscal Policies at the Center for New York City Affairs at the New School.
Good evening. My name is Ken Knuckles. I'm Vice Chair of the New York City Planning Commission. I'm a resident of the Bronx, and I am a property owner of a Class 1 building.
And as I said, I'm Vicki Bean. I'm a law professor at NYU and faculty director of the Furman Center. I am a resident of Manhattan, and I am a Class 1 homeowner.
I'm Carol O'Claricon. I'm a former New York City Finance Commissioner and Budget Director under David Dinkins, and I am a Manhattan resident, have been since 1975, and a co-op owner.
I'm Raymond Majeski. I'm Deputy Director and Chief Economist at City Council Finance, and I live in Brooklyn, where I own a lovely co-op.
Hi, I'm LaTanya McKinney. I'm the City Council Finance Director.
Good evening. My name is Gary Rodney. In addition to being a commission member, I oversee a tax credit syndication firm where I finance affordable housing throughout the country.
So we are going to, we have a hard stop to be out of the theater by 10 o'clock. We're here as, want to hear from you as long as is required to hear from you, but we are going to enforce a 3-minute rule on your testimony. You can submit written testimony or write up your comments later. You can submit them on the portal, which is the NewYorkCity.gov site if you put in Advisory Commission on Tax Reform. So we will get started. I have to apologize. We have bright lights looking at us, so it's very hard to see you all. So I will call the names of the first 5 people that we'll hear from, and so that you know where you are coming up, and then we will get started. We will call you in the order in which you signed up, other than we will give some of your elected representatives a chance to go first. So we're going to start with Jim Karras for Borough President Gail Brewer. And then we will hear from Paul Smith, who is a representative of Councilmember Chen, Jeremy Shapiro, Joseph Calisi, and Peter Kidd will be our first panel. Right over here.
Thank you. I'm Jim Karras, representing Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer. New York City's property tax system picks winners and losers. It was designed that way, but it was also designed to keep property taxes for homeowners low and stable, a goal it has achieved to a large extent and which is still important. but there appears to be a growing body of evidence that reform is necessary. First, the most global inequity. Economists consider the property tax to be a regressive tax. At least for homeowners, how much you owe has nothing to do with how much you make. Second, some of the largest private landowners in New York City and Manhattan pay no property taxes. Add to this the fact that this year many city homeowners will receive a huge property tax increase due to the loss of their federal deductions in order to keep taxes in Alabama low. You all have your work cut out for you. We need a property tax system that is fair. The current system was not designed to treat all properties equally. It contains provisions to freeze the proportion of the entire tax that the four classes of property pay, as well as caps on how much the assessment on an individual Class 1 home can increase, regardless of how high the market goes. Provisions were added to ensure that co-ops and condos would not be too disadvantaged when compared to the favorable treatment of Class 1s. However, this system does provide stability for homeowners with protections from rapidly increasing property values. Homes in areas that have seen the most rapid increases in values for the longest times may now have received more than their fair share of protection. Nevertheless, protection is still a valid goal. In recent decades, the property tax has fluctuated between about 35% of the city's total tax revenues and about 45%. It is now at an even higher percentage, about 47%. We should at least consider targeting a smaller portion of tax revenues to come from the property tax. Philadelphia's property tax makes up about 20% of its local tax revenues, and Chicago's about 30%. While too low a number may be destabilizing, perhaps targeting it to no more than a third of tax revenues should be studied. This right-sizing of the city's current over-reliance on the property tax could also result in a needed downsizing of the influence of the real estate lobby. This smaller pie should also be spread over a broader base. We are not advocating property taxes on universities and not-for-profits. We recognize their value. However, some of the city's largest private landowners pay nothing. There are two Ivies in the country that make virtually no payments in lieu of taxes to their host city, and guess where one of them is located? We think pilots on major city tax-exempt landowners should be studied. Finally, a change is necessary to recognize the changing use of property, especially in Manhattan. A growing class of property owners use their property to stash money. Some have referred to these super luxury homes as, quote, safe deposit boxes with views. A luxury pied-à-terre tax such as that proposed by State Senator Brian Kavanaugh should be studied. If I could just wrap up with our proposals. First, that homeowners, especially long-term homeowners who have been protected from rapidly rising taxes, are not harmed. Any significant increases to their assessments above the norm should not occur until the property is sold. Second, that those who may have been paying property taxes that are significantly above those of similarly situated properties have their tax bills reduced. Third, rental residences should see property taxes decrease, but only if there is a legal requirement for landlords to pass those decreases to tenants. We have yet to see landlords offering rent rebates or reductions from their Trump tax cut savings. Homeowners who have been paying too much could begin to see tax relief immediately from the luxury pied-à-terre tax. As assessments are reset upon sale, they and renters would see further relief. Finally, circuit breakers could be considered for lower-income homeowners who have paid a disproportional amount or would owe a disproportional amount under any reforms. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Karras, can I ask about your proposal about rental properties? What did you have in mind, or what does the Borough President have in mind in terms of a rebate?
That we have not fleshed it out yet. It's something we're looking at, but there would be some requirement for either the lion's share of it to be passed through or some kind of rebate.
I see. Okay, well, keep us posted if you
Thank you.
come up with a proposal. Thank you. Go ahead.
Could I just press on that? But you haven't thought about the actual technical mechanics of how to do that?
No, it's something we're looking at now.
Thanks.
Thank you. And let me also just, I should have mentioned, the Department of Finance has folks out in the lobby area. If people have individual issues with their property taxes, any questions, any concerns that are individual to their properties, there are folks who can help you out in the lobby. Okay, so we will now hear from Paul Smith-Leonard, who represents Councilmember Chin. Thank you very much, Mr. Karras.
Thank you so much for allowing me to speak tonight. Again, my name is Paul Smith-Leonard. I'm Chief of Staff for Councilmember Margaret Chin, who represents Council District 1, Lower Manhattan. This is obviously a major issue, and just very glad to be here to represent her tonight. She told me to come here to report back about what everyone who took the time out to be here tonight to testify has to say to the commission, so I will be sure to do that. I know that the council member has been working in particular on property tax relief for small property owners, particularly those who have no intention to sell but have been burdened by rising property taxes and certainly could use some relief. I want to thank the members of the commission for your diligent work on behalf of the people of the city, and I look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeremy Shapiro.
Hi. I'm here with two of my neighbors tonight, representing a small co-op building on 121st Street between Broadway and Amsterdam in Manhattan. The building is a 100-year-old 6-story building with 24 apartments. It's the first building in New York City to have converted to a co-op. To maintain the property, we recently completed over $500,000 of roof, parapet, and pointing repairs. The area of Morningside Heights is gentrifying. A 22-story luxury condominium building is rising on 121st Street between Broadway and Amsterdam. Another higher luxury building is planned to go up on the campus of Union Theological Seminary. In addition, there's a new building next to St. John the Divine Cathedral and several buildings formerly belonging to St. Luke's Hospital and the Jewish Theological Seminary have been converted into luxury apartments. Currently, real estate taxes are figured based on area valuations, but our building, based on its age, size, and who lives in it, is very different from these new buildings. The area valuation method has meant that our real estate taxes have gone up by the following percentages: 9.3% in 2015, 13.7% in 2016, 11.7% in 2017, and 7.8% in 2018. These figures are, for us, outrageous and painful. Our building is made up of a mix of retired seniors living on a fixed income, young families with children, 2 single parents, and middle-class New Yorkers that make the city work: teachers, actors, and not-for-profit workers. Longtime residents of our building, some are thinking about moving, as paying these costs, major repairs, and real estate taxes makes their homes unaffordable. We raise our collective voice to say that all family homes should be treated equally. 1, 2, 3 family homes, co-ops, and condos should be taxed at the same rate. In addition, we would like to see overlay criteria for conditions such as size of building, smaller size equals a larger burden per homeowner, age of building, and recent costs paying for major repairs. Thank you for your consideration of this issue. It is time for greater parity in New York City. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Shapiro, just one second.
Mr. Shapiro, thank you for your testimony. I have a question. Could you go back to the mic?
Absolutely, yeah.
So when you were advised of these tax increases, what official rationale were you given for the increases?
Actually, I can't properly represent that because I'm not on the board of the building, and the board has been dealing with this more than I, as a regular homeowner in the building. We do have somebody here. Kirk, could you possibly answer that? I see. Anyway, sorry, I can't provide you that information now. We could send in a written statement about it.
Yeah, I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Mr. Shapiro, when the increases that you gave, are those in your tax bill or in your assessed value? If you can provide that, that would be helpful.
I believe that's our tax bill, if I'm not
Okay.
mistaken.
And also, it would be helpful for us to know, have you appealed that, or have you challenged that? And if so, what was your
You
experience?
mean our
in the
building individually? No.
challenge? Yeah, okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Joseph Calisi.
Good day. I recall that when Mayor Bloomberg first took office, the first thing that he did was to lower the rates for property taxes in Manhattan and raise them in the outer boroughs. This trend has never been corrected. A few years ago, I recall my taxes were at $2,000 to $3,000. Now they're around $8,000. As the owner of a two-family house, it's hard to have the bills add up and have to pay some of these things with the increases in Con Ed and whatnot. Other than, let's see, you know, it seems like the city is using us as a piggy bank for whatever they want to spend money on. And what the city does is keep raising how much they're spending, and they go to us. A particular thing that I'm facing right now is PS 216 across the street from my house, which has a boiler on the street for the last 3 years. Should I be getting my taxes lowered for that? Why is a boiler on the street? I mean, they're supposed to be replacing it, but does it have to take 3 years? I mean, what happens if this boiler explodes? My house is going to be directly affected. The other thing is that new buildings that go up, traditionally almost, get rebates, abatements, and everyone else, like myself, has to pick up the slack on these taxes. And I'm just thinking that this is grossly unfair.
Sir, can you tell us what neighborhood you live in?
Fresh Meadows.
Fresh Meadows? Thank you very much.
In fact, there's another school on 188th Street that has the same problem with the boiler in the street. And I want to know, when is this boiler work going to be done? It's just impossible to deal with. I mean, we have a loss of parking, overnight parking. Mm-hmm. My tenant has to park blocks away because they can't park in front of the house.
If you don't mind, Mr. Calisi, as your taxes have gone up, you said from around $3,000 to around $8,000, have you raised the rent on your tenant accordingly, or?
Well, raising the rent is one thing, but there's a price pinch point where they can pay and they can't pay.
Right.
Not everybody has a $100,000 a year job, and those people tend to have their own homes. So I'm dealing with a smaller market, and basically with my salary, I'm shouldering the whole burden because, I've had a period of time where my tenant decided to move out for whatever reason, and I had to go find another. And it took me a year to find a tenant because they saw this boiler in front of the building and said, I'm not living here.
I see. Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I appreciate hearing from you. Peter Kidd.
Thank you for this opportunity to submit this testimony to the New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform on behalf of the Fitzpatrick Hotel Group. My name is Peter Kidd, and I'm the Chief Financial Officer for the Fitzpatrick Hotel Group. The group is a family-owned company which independently owns and operates 2 hotels in New York City. The Fitzpatrick Manhattan Hotel, a 91-room hotel on Lexington Avenue, which opened in 1991, and the Fitzpatrick Grand Central Hotel, a 155-room hotel on East 44th Street, which opened in 1997. As full-service hotel operators, we employ 160 people between the 2 hotels and our support office here in New York, here in the city. Many of our hotel employees are union employees who have been employed with us for more than 15 years with good pay and benefits. While the hotel industry's contribution to the city's tax revenue in both property taxes and hotel occupancy taxes continues to increase annually, individual hotel revenue, however, has remained stagnant, while operating costs have increased and profitability has declined. For example, the cost of employing a room attendant has increased from $56,000 a year in 2008 to $84,000 a year in 2018, a 50% increase. which is great, but unfortunately there's been no revenue increase to offset those cost increases. In spite of the economic challenges that hotels are facing, we continue to experience significant property tax increases. I would like to share with you some metrics on how the property tax burden has fundamentally changed over the last 10 years. From 2007 to 2018, our hotel profitability has declined by nearly 15%, but our property taxes have increased by 100%. Property tax as a percentage of revenue has increased from 6.2% of revenue in 2007 to 8.4% of revenue in 2014 and up to 11% of revenue in 2018. Property tax as a percentage of hotel profit has increased from 19% of hotel profit in 2007 to 26% in 2014 and then up to 43% in 2018. Our New York City property tax was 5 times the size of our city income tax liability in 2007, 11 times the size of city income tax in 2014, and is now 64 times the size of our city income tax. I believe that the property tax system should recognize that hotels are very different from the typical commercial property. For example, the large office building I work in next to the Fitzpatrick Grand Central Hotel pays property taxes at $11 per square foot, whereas the hotel pays property taxes at $25 a square foot, despite also generating sales taxes and hotel occupancy taxes. Hotel revenue changes on a daily basis, while commercial properties generate revenue under stable long-term leases. As a result, most commercial buildings do not see the same volatility in tax assessments that Fitzpatrick Hotel Group has experienced. For example, the lowest annual increase in the valuation for the Fitzpatrick Grand Central Hotel in the last 6 years was 27%, while the highest increase in the annual valuation was 43%. Each year, we are forced to waste money on attorney's fees to try to mitigate our tax obligation at the Tax Commission from these unsustainable levels. A sustainable hotel industry is absolutely vital to the economic health of this city, as it supports numerous jobs, creates enormous sales and payroll tax revenues for the city and local government, and helps attract both leisure and business travelers and the dollars they spend here in the city. In the interest of helping to make our industry sustainable, I would therefore request that the Advisory Commission find a more equitable way in assessing property taxes on hotels going forward.
Thank you. Can you submit your written testimony so that we have those figures?
Sure. Yes.
Okay. Any questions? Great.
If I might, just a couple questions. As you kind of know, we have an unincorporated business tax and a general corporations tax to tax you as a business.
Yes.
That's not what the property tax is about, right? It's meant to tax the value of land and the value of an improvement. And I'm not sure, how do you think we should be getting at that part of the story? You know, I mean, business tax, your net income, okay. How should we be getting at the value of your land and your improvement?
Well, I think that my experience has been that the city, the Department of Finance has changed the way we've ended up, the impact over the last 10 to 15 years. Mm-hmm. Throughout the 2000s, up to 2008, when we had the Great Recession, property tax as a percentage of revenue was a predictable 6 to 7%, mm-hmm. reflected in the valuations. As sales increased, as profits increased through the 2000s, that would be reflected in valuations, and you would end up with an equitable tax. Obviously, things changed dramatically after 2008. But the hotel industry never recovered. It got better from 2010 to 2014, but not back up to 2008 levels, and has been declining since 2014. So the end result is, if revenue stays flat and your labor costs are increasing by 50%, you're going to end up in a very bad place. And the Hotel Association has been to the Department of Finance and made these representations, but they haven't come up with an equitable system to assess these values. And I believe that we should be able to carve out, well, my ideal solution, which I know is not necessarily a city-based solution, is that we have our own commercial class. Because I then think we would get a fair value system over the long term. Not necessarily next year or the year after, but over a period of time, over a period of years, I think it'd be a fairer way to assess hotels. But in the meantime, our property taxes are going up dramatically, but our profits are going down.
Thank you.
Can I ask, can I just ask, you file the same normal I&E as other commercial property, is that correct?
I&E, I'm not familiar with. We
Income and expense.
Yeah, we do file an RPIE, which is an income and expense, yes.
Right. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
The $25 per square foot metric that you mentioned, is that a citywide metric, or does that differ with the property?
I used it because that's my personal experience. The city doesn't track it on that basis, but I'm showing it as a way to say the hotel that I'm responsible for is the property tax is twice as much, more than twice as much as the commercial rent. And from what I understand from speaking to the tax attorney experts in this field, that's consistent with what you'd find if you did a broader group of assessment.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your testimony. I'm going to tell all five.
I don't understand.
Richard Bourne.
If you tell the others to hear us.
Yes, I can tell you who to queue up. It's Richard Bourne, and then Naomi Avigdor, and then Ralph Yozo, and then Doreen Alderman. And finally, in the group I've been given, Laura Abel. So you're in that order. You can expect, and there's 2 mics here, so you can go to whichever side suits you. Thank you. Are you Mr. Bourne?
Yes, hi.
Terrific.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to be heard. My name is Richard Bourne. I'm a principal in a group called BD Hotels. We have developed, own, and operate 24 hotels in New York. We have 2,500 employees. Virtually all of those jobs have been newly created by us with private capital, with virtually no subsidies. All of them are good-paying jobs. Some of the highest-paying jobs are seen in our industry. I'm not sure if you have, I asked to have this sort of sent up. I randomly selected 4 hotels from my portfolio, 2 small hotels, 2 big hotels. You will see we have had a lost decade. Our revenue per room, our revenue per building has gone down in 10 years. Our revenue is down anywhere from 5 to 20% gross revenue across our entire portfolio. During this period of time, our labor costs are up by 50%. Our water charges are probably tripled. Every other cost we have, and we're not getting out of revenue. It all comes out of profit margin. New York City hotels have lost 50 to 75% of our profitability. We have an enormous population of well-paid jobs that are all being threatened because these hotels will start to fall very quickly if the trend continues. Because as you've also seen on that sheet, our real estate taxes are up from 25 to, in some cases, 100% during the period of time that our profits are dwindling away to nothing. This is totally unfair, and it's totally bad for the city. We employ 10 to 15 times as many people per square foot as the average office building or apartment house. So when a hotel is converted to an apartment house, you lose 90 to 94% of the workers. These people are going to land right back on finance's lap to support. It's a zero, taxing hotels is a zero-sum game in the city of New York. You're not making money, you're going to lose money. It is also unfair because you're double dipping into our pockets. Unlike any other class of what you call real estate, we pay sales tax, we charge sales tax that we collect and occupancy tax equaling to over 18% of our gross revenues. We are not real estate. We are owner-occupied real estate. No different than a movie theater, a freestanding restaurant, and frankly, no different than JP Morgan Chase and Goldman Sachs. I don't see you asking JP Morgan Chase what their revenues are in their owner-occupied real estate when you determine how to tax them. But you ask us. We're not renting space, we're renting an experience, we're renting services, we rent a business. A part of that is real estate. You ask the fellow who testified before me, how should we be taxed? We should be taxed as a piece of real estate. Look at other pieces of real estate. Look at our neighbors. I have hotels taxed between $20 and $80 per square foot, while my neighbors are being taxed between $10 and $20 per square foot. You must recognize that we are an operating enterprise, and we deliver services besides real estate. And if somebody is creative or inventive and builds a better mousetrap, it's not real estate that we should be looking at. But I think the real greatest threat to the city is the employment. We have 50,000 employees, and I think you're going to lose an enormous number of these employees. So I think you really need to evaluate. We represent 3% of the tax base. In terms of real estate tax, we're minuscule. Allowing our business to survive would have virtually no effect on the other tax classes, and you really need to give serious consideration to us.
Thank you.
And let me just see if I can clarify some things in my own mind on it. I mean, it seems to me what you're asking us is to look again, valuing an income-producing property is a function of what you assign the net income is and what you use for the capitalization rate at simplest. So you're asking us to rethink the way in which we assign net income to hotel properties? Is that roughly what I'm getting out of this, or is this something else?
Okay. I would ask you to evaluate it on two levels. One is to look at us at real estate and assess what we might be worth per square foot, but you should ignore our income and expense statements. The other way is look at our income and expense statements, but really look at them and look what's happening to our profits. Because you'll see from the examples of the 4 hotels I gave you, my profits are disappearing, but my taxes are going up. And the fact of the matter is, there are dozens of hotels that are teed up to go out of business because they're not making money. And the tax burden is, at this point, in many, many hotels, greater than the actual profits.
Thank you.
James?
I'm just trying to make sense of what's going on at the big picture level. So what I've heard over the years is that hotel room rates have been rising, hotel occupancy rates have been rising. The product of those two approximates hotel revenue. So for your hotels, have room rates and occupancy rates been rising or declining?
No, declining. You see, you're looking at a small piece of a big picture. I gave you 2007 and 2017. From 2007 to 2009, as many businesses did, our business collapsed. Our revenues went down enormously. We recovered a bit from 2009 to 2012 and 13, and we've been on the decline since. Our room rates and our total revenue per room is less now than it was a decade ago, and our costs are up by 50%. We used to have a profit margin of 35%. When your income goes down and your expenses go up materially, that disappears.
But we've also been hearing that tourism is at record levels. And the mayor tells us that, all mayors have told us that every year for the last few years. 54 million, 55 million, whatever, 60 million. How can it be that tourism is growing like that and hotel occupancy is declining?
Hotel occupancy is stable. Revenue is declining. Room rates are declining. One simple reason is 10 years ago, there was no such thing as Airbnb and the likes. Now there are 50,000 units, a shadow inventory that you guys are not taxing, that are out there, that is driving down room rates. Additionally, there is more inventory. But what saying you've been hearing is really not fair. These numbers are in the hands of finance. They have our numbers. They know each and every hotel that was open 10 years ago is collecting less money today. They know that. And they know that our expenses are up by 40, 50%. Finance knows that. What you read in the New York Post or the Daily News or the New York Times, it's great anecdotal stories. It's not right, and finance has the data. I gave you an uncherry-picked snippet from my inventory. You go to finance, go to the phone book, pick out 10 hotels, look at the numbers. You'll see it's true. Just do it randomly.
Thank you.
Let me ask you a question. Have you challenged
Research agenda?
these assessments?
Every year aggressively.
And so what happened?
Every year aggressively, I get a tweak of a help. I pay my lawyer to do it, and the next year, you jack it back up. I have one hotel that's between $45 and $50 million in assessment every single year. You know why? Because every year you make it 50, and every year you bring it down to 45. And then you make it 50, and you bring it down to 45. Meanwhile, the assessment was $30 million on that hotel 10 years ago when I was making twice as much profit. That's a fact, and it's probably a fact of virtually every hotel, and you have the numbers, and you know it.
Yeah, but do you agree that the value of properties has increased in New York City?
There have been a dozen transfers of hotels in 2018 at prices materially less than they were acquired for 2 or 3 years ago. My hotels are worth less today than they were in 2007, and I could tell you the Viceroy Hotel on 57th Street just sold for $42 million. The buyer paid $150 million for it. The W on Union Square just transferred at 25% less than the buyer paid 4 years ago. Every single hotel is worth 30, 40% less now than it was 3, 4 years ago. Ask any appraiser.
How do you explain the increase in the supply of hotels in New York City, if that is the case?
There is a very low cost of capital, and there are billions
So
of dollars.
everyone is irrational, they're just building? I'm just trying to get a sense of...
We live in a world awash in capital with very low financing costs, and there are billions of dollars looking to cram their money into the city of New York for the purpose of just finding a safe haven, even if there's no profitability to it. But if you look at actual transfers of hotels, speak to every appraiser in New York City hotels are worth 30%, 40% less today than they were worth even 3, 4 years ago.
Sir, could I just ask, so I can understand what you've given us, how do you define actual value? What's the definition of actual value?
Actual value is the value in the marketplace. So the value in the marketplace is down. But I will tell you one other thing in terms of value. There are many people in this industry who are not selling. And if you're not selling, then taxes need to account for the fact that you need to survive and operate your business. But actual values in New York City hotels have gone down. The marketplace is depressed for the sale of hotels. Look at the number of transfers and look at the actual data of the transfers that occurred.
Thank you very much, Mr. Boren.
Naomi Avigdor.
Hi, and thank you. I'm Naomi Avigdor. I'm speaking for myself. I'm not representing anybody except myself. So,
Can you please speak closely to the mic?
yes, I represent myself. And I'm a computer scientist, so I came up with an idea of how you should, not should, but could calculate property tax. And I would like to present to you this idea and see maybe it can help in creating a new system of property tax. So the way I started is I looked in public data and I found out that the budget for next year for property tax is $27.7 billion. And I also calculated that there are 5.5 billion square feet of built property in the 5 boroughs. So if you divide the money that you need by the number of square feet that you have, it's average $5 per square foot. So this is if everybody paid, every property owner paid you $5 per square foot, you will have your budget. But of course, this is not fair, and it needs a little bit more work to be done. So I decided that, or I think that we should have, or you should have 3 parameters for every property. One is how many square feet are unbuilt, which would be for vacant land or maybe for the yard. Square feet for, that is built, and then the purpose of the property. And then the property tax would be some dollars for the built portion, some dollars for the unbuilt portion, and then dollars for the purpose. So, so if you take a property and it's vacant, then he only pays for the dollar amount for the land. If it's generating income, like a movie theater or a hotel that this gentleman was talking about, or a store or anything else, you pay for the square foot of the built section area, for the square foot of the unbuilt area, and for the dollars that that kind of property can generate for a specific activity. So if you have an apartment building, you can say maybe $2 per square foot for free market apartments, and $0 for regulated apartment, and maybe minus $1 for SROs, maybe minus $2 for rent control, or the items that you decide to promote or demote depends on what the city thinks is important or not important. If you want to control traffic in Midtown, you can have a tax on all the garages. So the cost to park in a specific garage will be so expensive, people will not come to Midtown with their car. They will take public transportation. So, for example, if somebody lives far away from public transportation, like in Staten Island, they don't have a subway, they should deduct dollars from their property tax and add to somebody who lives in an area that has public transportation. And all kinds of parameters that you think are important or not important for the city, you add and subtract dollars per square foot and average to the $5 that will make your budget.
Thank you very much.
That's my idea. And I think it could be simulated on a computer, and you can find out what's the best way to do it.
I think you submitted it, did you not? Because
Yes, I
believe
did.
I read part of it this
I did. I revised it a little bit today, so.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
for your
If anybody wants this idea in writing, I have it printed.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Ralph Yoso.
Hi, thank you again. I just want to point out that the commission, when they describe the purpose, they leave out the part that you cannot reduce the property tax, right? So I think we should be very clear. Everyone knows here, everyone should know here that the commission's purpose is to keep not only revenue neutral, but increasing, and it's been increasing at 10%. So thanks to the Office of Management and Budget, they publish on page 6,000 of their revenue forecasting document. I recommend everyone look at it, the tax levy. And 20 years ago, it was around $7 billion. Now, 20 years later, it is $28 billion that they're collecting. Tax levy just means the money we're all paying, right? So these numbers don't make much sense, right? They're 8 billion, 7 billion. No. So I say let's call it an elephant. And this elephant weighed, when it was a baby, it was born in 1980 with this tax law, and around 2000, it was 7 billion pounds. Now, it's 20 years later, it's 28 billion pounds. And what we're trying to do here is push, because right now, Class 1 property has about 15% of the elephant on it, and we're trying to push the elephant around. So owner-occupied dwellings have to be careful, because we're getting the best deal, and if we listen to all the hotels and condos, not condos, but the commercial property, we have to be very vigilant, I think, everyone here. So another thing I want to point out is that I'm a member of the Community Education Council, so I would propose that we have a community budget council where people have a say in the budget, in the New York City budget, because this astronomical growth of the budget is not magic. It's happening because people are doing it, and they're doing it to us. So we have to be part of that. We have a community education council. Let's have a community budget council. Now, I also want to read the law. The assessor, this is our Article 18 law and the real property tax in New York State law. It says the assessor of any special assessing unit shall not increase the assessment of any individual property classified as Class 1 by more than 6%, except improvements, of course, which Department of Finance thinks everything's an improvement, even if you repair your home. It says shall not and by more than. But one solution is we use inflation. The inflation numbers are around 0 or 2%. There's nothing in the law that says they must increase your property tax by your assessed value by 6% or 8% for co-ops and condos. I think co-ops and condos, owner-occupied, and Class 1 property should band together, and we're going to need that because if this commission changes the class share, we're going to get hurt by it. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Doreen Alderman.
Here I am. I'm a third-generation New Yorker. I inherited 3 apartment buildings in the East Village from my father, who was a postman. My grandson goes to school in the East Village. I volunteer at his school. We are owner-occupied and also house 57 other families. In addition, 2 of my buildings provide commercial space for 4 small businesses that serve the community. The average rent is $2,400 per month, with some variations, of course. My taxes average $5,600 per apartment, 22% of the rent. For one of my buildings, the taxes are 29% of the rent. In Manhattan, the average taxes per apartment is about $7,900 per year, or about $660 per month. Manhattan apartment building owners are paying between 20% and 30% of rent in property taxes. On average, it is 23% based on current taxes and 29% after the 5-year phase-in. I'm happy to pay my fair share of taxes. The taxes per my apartment are equivalent to a single-family home that recently might sell in Brooklyn worth $2.1 million. The taxes are equivalent to the taxes paid by co-ops and condos that sold for as much as $1.8 million last year. Recently sold rental buildings show median taxes per $1 million of value of more than $12,000, median taxes per apartment of $6,740 for the year, and about $560 per month. We need a property tax system that does not make it difficult to live, own, and operate rental apartment buildings. While the city says they need more rental apartments, the property taxes seem to suggest otherwise. Building owners who fix their apartment buildings should not be penalized by huge increases based on the cost of the fix and have to rely on the J51 to temporarily mitigate the increase. Apartment building taxes as a percent of rent should not exceed 15%. For my 3 buildings, taxes are 22% of my income, and in the case of one building, it's almost 30% of the rent I collect. To keep up with the fiscal demands of the building, I've sold properties in Washington Heights, Long Island City, Chinatown, and Florida to compensate. Thank you.
Thank you. Ma'am, can I ask you, I'm sorry, Ms. Alderman? Can I just ask you, are the buildings rent regulated or not?
Yes, we have RS tenants.
And so your increases over the years that you've seen your property taxes increase have been?
There has been rent freezes. This year we finally got 1.5% for a 1-year lease, but definitely the taxes are increasing by 10%. When I added up how much I paid last year to this year, it was $37,000 more. So that's definitely not what I'm getting with the rents.
Can I ask you, some people have proposed that landlords should be required to tell their tenants what percentage of their rent is going for taxes. What would you think of that proposal?
I think always transparency is key. I think it's very important that the tenants know how much it costs to heat the building, when the gas you have your gas turned off, how much it costs to actually get the stoves working, bed bugs, $50K just on bed bugs, and it goes to me. I'm the one that, it's on me. So I just don't see where I don't know, I can't sell any more buildings. I want to keep these buildings. So I don't know what to do. I'm here to plead.
And you've heard earlier the suggestion that from Gail Brewer's office that maybe there be a rebate to tenants if taxes on rental properties came down. What would your reaction to that be, at least during some transition period?
Okay, so I don't understand. The tenants would get the money and I wouldn't? Is that what you're saying?
That's a proposal.
That's not a good idea. Not a good idea at all.
Spoken like.
Okay, so thank you very much, Ms. Alderman.
May I ask you, ma'am, we have not heard as much about rental buildings as we'd like, and we appreciate your testimony. If you do have it in writing, would you submit it? Because we'd like to look at it again. I mean, we will have it recorded.
Absolutely. I belong to RSA, and I will tell them that you're interested in what, and maybe I'll ask them to help me with the whole thing, because I only know my buildings. But they know a lot of different rental buildings, and we're struggling.
But your buildings are useful to us and also thinking about it. And,
Okay.
you could tell us just a little bit about where they are, and the fact that they're stabilized buildings matters a lot, too.
Okay.
So we appreciate that.
And I'd also like to know if you're carrying the entire water bill or if there's separate water metering for your tenants.
No, I carry the whole water bill. Now, if there's a commercial tenant, they take a little bit of a percentage, but no, it's all on me.
Right, that's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Laura at Able.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'm here on behalf of Lawyers Alliance for New York. We're a nonprofit law office. We represent nonprofits that serve low-income communities in New York City. We provide business and transactional legal assistance to them, including assistance with leases. We hear frequently from our nonprofit clients that they have to shut down services in certain neighborhoods because they can no longer afford the occupancy costs. While all commercial property owners and renters suffer when property tax rates go up, nonprofits funded by government grants or by individual donations can't raise prices when occupancy costs increase. This is a real problem because the city has outsourced crucial social services to the nonprofit sector. When nonprofits can no longer afford to operate in neighborhoods, that may mean that there are no homeless shelters there, no senior centers, no after-school programs. The 420A exemption for properties owned by charitable, educational, or religious organizations and used for those purposes does allow nonprofits to purchase buildings. This is necessary for a number of reasons. It allows nonprofits to stay in gentrifying neighborhoods and continue providing services. It allows nonprofits to plan for the future. It allows them to use their property in a way that a landlord might find objectionable, for instance, to run a homeless shelter. And it allows nonprofits to use their buildings that they own as security when the city waits months or years to reimburse them for services that they've provided. They can use their buildings to get credit. At an earlier hearing, there was discussion of how the exemption should be handled when a property owned by a nonprofit is used for commercial purposes, and I think that's an appropriate thing for the Commission and Department of Finance to think about. But I want to stress the importance of ensuring that nonprofits that are using their premises in furtherance of their charitable missions are allowed to keep their exemptions. I also want to ask what can be done to help nonprofits that rent their premises. Like other commercial tenants, nonprofits are usually required by their landlords to cover any increases in the real property tax. Again, they tend not to be able to raise their, their prices or donations to cover that cost. So I'd like to urge that the city should consider creating a tax abatement for nonprofits that rent in certain neighborhoods or that provide essential services. The city did something like this at 120 Wall Street in the 80s. With the huge citywide increase in occupancy costs, I think it's time to revisit that idea. Thank you.
Thank you. If you have any statistics about the increases that nonprofits are facing in their rent, or whether or not we're seeing a big decrease in nonprofits renting, that would be very helpful.
Sure, and I did submit, but just a couple hours ago, some written testimony.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, we're going to go now to Katie Lobb, who is here representing Councilmember Carlina Rivera, and then we'll hear from Jason Leaf, Kara Kelly, Karen Young, Gail Steinberg, and Ian Clark.
Hi, good evening. Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to testify on behalf of Councilwoman Carlina Rivera, representing the 2nd District in Manhattan. For decades, New Yorkers have had to struggle with an opaque and unfair property tax system on which they have sought change. But now, thanks to this commission, positive changes are on the way. As this commission develops its recommendations, it is essential that members ensure that property taxes are distributed equitably and no one shoulders an undue tax burden just to live or work in New York City. In my district in Manhattan, where most people live in multiple unit dwellings, we are facing an affordability crisis that threatens the stability of middle-class and low-income New Yorkers. We can see the impacts on our neighborhoods with luxury towers and empty storefronts replacing affordable housing and beloved small businesses. The pressure of inequitable property taxes exacerbates this phenomenon by hitting hardest those least able to afford it. It is important that any reform to the tax code does not further contribute to this crisis by increasing taxes on condominiums, co-ops, and rent-stabilized buildings, the home to thousands of working and middle-class New Yorkers. Yes, even on co-ops and condos, which many assume are vestiges of the wealthy. In fact, as much of our constituent cases reflect, there are seniors on fixed retirement incomes living in many of these units, ones that they purchased when barriers to enter home ownership in this city were much lower. Even some of our older co-op stock, originally constructed as rental buildings, are populated by rent-stabilized units that were never sold by the sponsor and are home to original tenants. The affordability crisis in Manhattan extends beyond housing, as small businesses struggle to survive on block after block. Every day we see more and more shuttered storefronts and mom-and-pop businesses that cannot keep up with expenses. These increased costs often come from landlords who pass property taxes on to commercial tenants, making higher property tax payments just one more cost-crushing burden for small businesses. I ask that you review our system by considering its fairness, treating all types of residential real estate on equitable footing, and recognizing that small businesses may ultimately be handed any additional burdens imposed on their landlords. I have faith that this commission will be able to balance those needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Jason Leaf.
Hello, my name is Jason Leaf, and I'm a new board president of a co-op at 345 East 69th Street. I've submitted a set of slides this afternoon, and what I would hope to do is give you some of the numbers from our building and give you a sense of the strain and stress we face, and I believe we are a representative building for many co-ops in the city, and also give you a sense of the disparity as between what I understand are called Class 2, which is the co-ops and condos, versus Class 1. And so last year, we spent around approximately $1.5 or $1.6 million on taxes, real estate taxes. That represented 58% of all the maintenance we collected, 58% of all the maintenance we collected from the approximately 130 apartments in our building. It also represented, to fill the tax increase, 86% of the maintenance increase. And we've tried to keep our maintenance increase at 4% a year, which is itself above inflation. It is, that number, 1.6 million, is double the payroll that we paid our staff. It is triple what we pay for fuel, water, sewer, electric, and gas as a building. And it is 4 times the building's mortgage payment per unit time. The prior president of the board did a calculation for me. He said in 1996, our real estate taxes were $388,000. And so that means in 22 years, we've gone up quadruple. That is a compounded rate of increase of 7%. Per year, it's much more. It's, if you don't take it as a compounded number, it's in the teens of percentages, I believe. We project at that rate that 1.6 million per year will double in 10 years to, I guess, 3.2 million, which, of course, our maintenance is not keeping up with at 4%, and inflation is well below that. We have a graph in our slides that shows what seems to be, I don't want to call it exponential, but probably near exponential growth over those 22 years. An interesting slide we also have is a comparison of Class 1 and Class 2 from the actual data on the New York City website. And so Class 2 is reported by New York City data to be about 24% of the market value of real estate, whereas Class 1 is 45%, which means we're about, give or take, half the market value. But we pay more than double Class 1 in actual property taxes paid. We pay 36% for Class 2 versus 15% for Class 1. And so when you think about that, what accounts for that? We think what accounts for it is things like the fact that there is a cap on the increase for Class 1, but not for Class 2. And again, these are homes. These are homes of people. They're homes of retired people in my building. They're homes of millennials. They're homes of new families. I saw one of your board members, your commission members, works for city planning. My dad was a clerk for city planning for 30 years. I grew up in Brooklyn. This is, I grew up in a walk-up rental apartment. I've had the good fortune of working hard and becoming a lawyer and making my way to the city. And this is my home. It's where I raised my son. Those numbers are going up in a significant way, and at some point they will become devastating. My understanding is many other buildings, we've had very smart people advising us, but many other buildings are heading for bankruptcy because of this.
Thank you. Have you challenged your assessments?
My understanding is that from year to year we do challenge the assessment, and I'm not sure that it certainly those numbers, are still going up. And whether there is some slight adjustment to that or not, whatever appeal we make of it is whether we get something back or not. In the grand scheme, it has not changed that upward trend.
Thank you.
You submitted this testimony?
You submitted the slides earlier today, right? I did. Yes, thank you. Kara Kelly.
Good evening. My name is Kara Kelly. I live at 49 West 69th Street, a multi-unit brownstone, which I own and operate with my sister. It is also our home. 49 West 69th Street is a 10-unit brownstone on the Upper West Side with 2 owner-occupied units and 8 rental units. 50% of those rental units are stabilized. Our building has been owned by our family since World War II. Our great-aunt and our grandmother, both immigrants, operated as a rooming house, and then in the 1970s, it was converted into apartments. We are here today to tell you how the skyrocketing increases in property taxes for small rental buildings like ours are negatively affecting the city's housing stock and worsening the shortage of affordable and rent-regulated housing. We understand that single-family housing is of a big concern. We understand that. But we also think a big concern should be small apartment operators like ourselves, family-owned, who are providing affordable, regulated, safe housing. In the last 7 years, our property taxes have increased while our income has not really. Our taxes have gone up on average, roughly about 8% a year, and you all know the rates for regulated apartments, 1%, 2% a year, or 0. Now, meanwhile, the property values on our street have increased, like the rest of the city. But on our street, in our neighborhood, we have a unique situation where that's contributing to these skyrocketing rates, where luxury homes are coming onto the street, being converted, and raising our values. These luxury homes are driving up the value of the properties, increasing property values and taxes, but our rents, stabilized in free market, do not increase at the same pace. We provide stable, safe, affordable housing. Several retirees live in our building, including a retired city social worker. Our current tenants are long-term. Half of our tenants have been with us for more than 25 years, the longest 43. We have little turnover. Our tenants can afford the rents, and we make enough to maintain the building and in some years make a reasonable profit. There are many similar buildings in our neighborhood, in our block. Why are we taxed like these ultra-luxury single-family mansions when half of our rental units are rent stabilized? We are being punished for being part of a system that keeps rent affordable, a system which on principle we generally support. The truth is, the increasing taxes strongly incentivize small landlords like us to deregulate apartments, and worse, could force smaller landlords like us to sell our buildings. And if that happened, those buildings would be purchased by very wealthy people, the tenants would be evicted, and they would be turned into luxury single-family housing. Taxing buildings like ours as if they were luxury mansions instead of modest rent-stabilized buildings makes our future operation and our home and the home of our 9 tenants uncertain. In the last 75 years, our family has lived through many changes in the neighborhood, and when our block in our neighborhood struggled with high crime, dilapidated buildings, and drugs, we didn't give up and we didn't leave. Instead, we invested in our property. We were part of turning the neighborhood into a safe and vibrant community again, and as it is now. But now taxes could force us out of our home and our business, and we just don't think that's right, and we hope you will consider that.
Thank you very much.
You've submitted your testimony?
Have you submitted your testimony?
I have not, but we can.
Oh, please do.
Yeah, please do. Once again, you're kind of property one we'd like to hear more about, and I'll just say you present us one of the puzzles here. You know, big valuable housing, presumably you cash in, you have a potentially valuable piece of property, but we don't want you to cash in.
Well,
so how do we tax you so that you don't cash in?
Yeah, I mean, frankly, that might be a better economic choice for us.
Right.
But we enjoy living in our neighborhood, and we feel a responsibility. We have an opportunity to be good landlords, and we want to continue to do that. But at the rate these taxes are going, it's by far our largest expense, and it's cutting into it and cutting into it, and we see it all. We've seen it on our block in the last 10 years. Sell, turn into a luxury single-family house. 10 units are gone. Where do those tenants go?
Thank you.
49 West 69th. West 69th, right? Right, yeah. Thank you very much. Karen Young?
Good evening. Thank you for this opportunity. I am a two-family brownstone owner on the Upper West Side, and my real estate taxes have increased over 300% in the time that I've owned the building. I also represent a fabulous block association on the Upper West Side, and we like to think of ourselves as an amazing model, we hope, for other neighborhoods. We're 90% owner-occupied brownstones. We are very community involved. We do a lot of events, block improvement, maintenance, historical preservation, and sharing resources and trying to get neighbors to know one another. We're also very involved with the NYPD, in our case, the 24th Precinct. We have a representative at every monthly community meeting. We're involved in the precinct's Build the Block program, which is phenomenal. And the precinct captain or one of his representatives speaks at our annual membership meeting, various topics from community involvement to crime prevention. So that's all the good news, and obviously we're more than happy to pay our fair share of the real estate taxes to be part of this wonderful city. However, the flip side is, last year, my next-door neighbor sold the brownstone that she has been living in because her real estate taxes were now more than what she paid for the building. That is the cold, hard reality. Again, we're happy to pay our share, but it's very difficult as brownstone owners to continue to shoulder the burden of these ever-increasing, rather drastically increasing real estate taxes. Thank you.
Does she mind sharing? Ma'am, do you mind sharing the approximate amount of your taxes, annual taxes?
My taxes are actually, yeah, I hate to tell you my number because I'm actually quite small compared to the rest of my block. I'm a small building. My taxes are close to $30,000, but there are buildings on my block whose taxes are $60,000, $70,000. These are brownstones.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gail Steinberg, please. Ms. Steinberg? Sorry, Gail Steinberg? Ian Clark.
Good evening. My name is Ian Clark. I live in central Harlem, and I'd like to thank the Commission. I think you're charged with a very difficult task, because changing the property tax, there'll be winners and losers, or people that do better and some people that get really hurt by this. I'd just like to mention what I know of my neighborhood in Harlem. This is Brownstone Harlem, central Harlem. And it's somewhat similar, not so similar to this neighborhood, maybe more similar to Brownstone, Brooklyn, or other large brownstone neighborhoods throughout the city. There are many old-timers that bought back in the day. They did the right thing. They took on these old buildings, and this was when these neighborhoods were not trendy. These may be MTA workers, school teachers, parks department workers. These buildings have now gone up many multiples of times, and I'm very happy for these people, but their property tax hasn't kept pace with the value of the building. By resetting the property tax on these neighborhoods, I fear this will push out these individuals, and it'll accelerate the gentrification that's already happening in these neighborhoods. On thinking about this, there are two solutions that I can recommend or propose. One of them is maybe some consideration for long-term residents of these neighborhoods, or perhaps resetting the property tax when the properties are sold. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to take the next batch here, which is Chris Wilkinson, Natasha Ammott, Ajit Thomas, Michael Slattery, and Robert Nelson, in that order. So first, Chris Wilkinson.
Thank you to the Commission. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you for taking your time out of your Tuesday evening, and hopefully you guys can get home soon to watch the Red Sox lose the World Series. But anyway, I'm here. I live in a 6-story condo building in downtown Manhattan in the South Street Seaport. Our property taxes have increased by 66% since I bought the apartment back in 2013. That is a 13.5% annual increase over 4 assessment cycles. Our building has no abatements, and we did protest. The taxes got 2 reductions of under 5% in those 2 years, and one was related to Hurricane Sandy repairs that our building had to make. And since I bought the apartment, our taxes have gone from 40% to 60% of our combined taxes and common charges for our condo. I agree with Mr. Shapiro's point on the significant increases that get assessed to buildings when repairs are made to buildings. Our building is landmarked. We had to do facade repair that was extremely expensive for our building because we had to maintain certain city mandated thresholds. And then the city ends up assessing taxes on these improvements. Manhattan Class 2 properties also pay a disproportionate share compared to areas in gentrifying and in wealthier, more expensive neighborhoods in Brooklyn and Queens. We were recently looking, just in case, given the property tax burden was increasing so much in Manhattan, at places in Brooklyn with good school districts, and comparably priced apartments cost about 20 to 25% in terms of annual property taxes to ones in Manhattan. I think people in all neighborhoods can agree that property taxes are pretty arbitrary. For Class 2 properties, you guys look at 3, or not you guys, but the city looks at 3 different comparable rental properties and calculates your taxes based on an assumed market rent. For my apartment, it's $7,500 a month. The apartment right next to me rents for $5,000 a month, and that's a furnished apartment. So there's something off in that calculation. Just in conclusion, the most important thing to maintaining city services and a city's growth is maintaining a sustainable, healthy tax base. When that base begins to crumble, as we've seen in cities throughout the country, the problem snowballs for the taxpayers that remain in that city. That's all I have.
Thank you.
So I'm sorry, I missed, were you saying that when you looked in Brooklyn at comparable houses, it was 25% of the taxes that you
So
pay?
for comparison, the taxes on my apartment are about, it's a 2-bedroom apartment, it's about $1,700 a month. So it's $20,000 a year. We looked at a couple places in Park Slope and Borum Hill. They were $200 to $300 a month. At the cheapest, some more expensive ones were about $500 a month. And that was without abatements.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I want to understand it. Those were condos in Brooklyn?
Yes, those were all condos. So
Natasha,
the taxes and common charges were.
Sorry?
The taxes and common charges were separate for condos.
Okay. Got it. Thank you.
Good.
Natasha Ahmed?
Yep,
over there.
I'm here. Good evening. I reached out to Speaker Johnson's office this summer regarding a story that I don't think gets as much coverage, and that is the impact of property taxes on commercial tenants that are small businesses.
Good.
This is a particularly tough one because, as we know, commercial leases almost always include a pass-through of property taxes in some form to the tenant. But the city only charges landlords with property taxes, so us tenants don't have any tangible legal rights to challenge the tax bill. I'm the owner of a small business. I rent space in the Flatiron neighborhood, which I opened in 2012. My lawyer and I haggled with the landlord over how to handle the payment of real estate taxes. And in the end, I agreed to pay 30% of the annual increases, very much the norm in Manhattan leases. In my first year, the taxes amounted to just over $10,000, but they've gone up significantly every year. In July of this year, I was told that my annual taxes are now over $54,000. This adds an additional $4,500 to my monthly rent on a space that is less than 1,500 square feet. These taxes have risen at a rate completely out of proportion to my sales and profits. I can no longer earn a single penny from my business, and it's terrifying. So my questions for consideration by the Commission are fourfold. First, broadly speaking, can the Property Tax Office be mandated to consider the impact of dramatic tax increases on commercial tenants? Two, more specifically, can the city or state provide exemptions or some kind of refund to small businesses whose income tax filings show that they clearly cannot support the assessed taxes? I understand that there are some exemptions already in place for veterans, seniors, and the disabled, so there is some structure in place by which we might be able to assess how such a mechanism could take place. Third, could the state consider the role of a commercial property vacancy tax as a means to fill the revenue gap left by any form of commercial property tax relief for small business tenants? And then finally, perhaps a smaller point, but nonetheless still important, so much of commercial leases, in the way they get signed, it's about what the norm is for commercial leases. Can the city work with the New York City Bar Association or the Real Estate Board to help bring about changes to these norms so that lawyers have greater accountability to tenants, such that norms extend to easier opt-out provisions for tenants in unforeseeable situations like massive tax hikes, or include a process for looking ahead to the future market valuation of properties? Thank you.
Very interesting. Thank you. Have you submitted your testimony? I don't think
I did.
Okay.
This afternoon.
This afternoon. Okay. Thank you very much.
Any questions? Anybody?
Okay.
Ajit Thomas.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm the president of a co-op building in the Upper West Side. Our building of 85 apartments have 80 that are either studios or one-bedrooms. We only have 4 rental apartments in our building. The fact that our building has small apartments that are majority owned by owners tells you it's neither wealthy, nor does it have investors exploiting upmarket rents in our neighborhood. Our co-op has seen maintenance fee increase 5 to 10% every year for the last 10 years, caused chiefly by increases in property tax. Property tax is about 50% of our maintenance. Since 2008, the Department of Finance has increased our assessed property value for tax purposes 10.25% per year on an annual compounding basis. The methodology applied to assess our building value has zero connection to the type of residents who live there. I learned that the Department of Finance, as it appraises value of co-ops and condos, tries to look at comparable rental buildings. It then determines that since the rental market is heating up, a building such as ours, with hardly any renters, must also go up in value. While rent-seeking landlords in buildings similar to ours will see cash flow increase as the rental market heats up, middle-class, salary-seeking people like me see no corresponding increases in income. Regular salaries, reduced by income tax, do not see percentage increases in double digits. However, the Department of Finance almost punishes co-ops and condos occupied by owners just because the rental market is hot by increasing our property taxes. The middle-class apartment owner, already struggling to stretch their wages to live in New York City, bears the unfortunate burden of increasing tax revenues for the city, while wealthy single-family townhouse owners who are better positioned to pay such taxes see little or no increase to the property tax. Our building has been compared incorrectly to much larger rental buildings to assess property value. Department of Finance selected incorrect buildings in prior years before it applied its rental-flavored method to assess property value on our owner-occupied building. Our appeals to the Department of Finance to correct the situation have fallen on deaf ears. Our building has occupants whose average age is above 50. Several are retirees, and almost all are on an income that does not see the increase as much as our property taxes have risen. I implore you to reconsider the property tax methodology for co-ops and condos, and also, if you can, to revamp the current appeal process, which is currently run by lawyers and finance department, which provides zero transparency to apartment owners. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Anybody
Chairman.
else? Mike Slattery.
Good evening. Mike Slattery, representing the Real Estate Board of New York. New York City's real property tax system has been flawed since its inception in 1983, and subsequent amendments have further burdened residential rental property and commercial properties, particularly office buildings. In the landmark case, Hellerstein, the New York State Court of Appeals ruled that arbitrary fractional assessments violated state law requiring that all property must be assessed at full market value. In 1981, the new system repealed the full market value standard and codified the historical fractional assessment inequities in the new four-class system. As a result, residential rental property in Class 2 and all of Class 4 properties would continue to pay a disproportionate share of the tax levy in the new system. The new system also allowed the City Council to shift 5% of the class's share among other classes. Between 1983 and 1991, the class shares were shifted from Class 1 to Class 4. So during that period, during that 8-year period, Class 1's property share of the tax levy declined from 14% to 10%, and Class 4's share increased from 41% to 52%. This favorable treatment of Class 1 properties was occurring as single-family homes saw double-digit increases in the average sale price, according to the Department of Finance. One potentially redeeming aspect of S7000 was its call to readjust in 1989 the base proportions for class shares to reflect current market values. Instead of proceeding with this equitable change, the state legislature amended the law, adopted class shares used in 1991, and preserved the increases in the class shares that, for Class 4 and the reductions in share of Class 1. The legislature also took away the council's authority to adjust class shares, and in its place, beginning in '92, the legislature placed a 5% cap on the increase of class shares as a result of equalization of market value increases. Over the last 27 years in which the 5% cap was in place, 22 of those years, the cap was lowered to 2.75% or less, and in 4 of those years it was reduced to 0, all to protect Class 1. The relentless rise in property taxes has pushed the real property tax burden on residential rental properties and Class 4 properties to the breaking point and well beyond the tax burden of other major cities around the country. From the sample we took at, Manhattan office buildings range from 27 to 32% of their gross income of paying property taxes. Manhattan residential rental buildings between 28 and 37% of their gross income going to property taxes. And looked at another way, using current market values and not necessarily the city's values, office buildings are paying real property taxes between 2.3 and 2.75% of their current market value. Residential rental buildings are between 2.0 and 2.17%. And in comparison, Class 1 is paying basically 0.77% of their market value. We should not let the inequities and the complexities and the opaqueness of the current system distract us from an issue which has led all owners, including those significantly benefiting from the current system, to complain loudly and often about the real property taxes, namely that the real property tax burden is excessive. A fair real property tax system requires not only an equitable distribution of the tax levy, but an equitable burden based on value and ability to pay. Thank you. And we submitted testimony as well.
Yes, thank you. We got it.
I have a few things to ask about. Just first, the office buildings you're citing. The Lincoln Land's effective tax rate on industrial and commercial property in the country averages around, if I remember right, 2.2%. So I don't get the notion that our rates are that high by comparison. Perhaps we could follow up on exactly what makes you think they're so high? I know comparison effective tax rates across our 4 classes are hard to hell with across the country, but
Let me be clear. The analysis that we did with the percentages of gross were not Lincoln Land Institute analyses. They were our analyses based on a selected sample of our member properties.
okay.
And I know the Lincoln Land Institute has some weaknesses in it, but it shows that what it does also show is that in other cities that there is a difference, and particularly where values are low, tax rates are high, like Detroit. In places where there is not many taxes, property taxes become the sole burden, and they become high as well. We have lots of taxes and high values, and yet we have very high taxes. So I think there's something that needs to be addressed as that part of that problem.
Okay. Because the other observation I'd make about commercial property, if we're talking about Manhattan, is an old Dick Netzer observation that, the effective tax rate on commercial property in Manhattan is probably less than, locational rent. So it's not something that I'd be expecting to have a whole lot of impact on, which is basically what for everybody's saying is about what, being in Manhattan is tremendously valuable, and partially we're picking up an economic rent is being partially appropriated by the city from just the sheer value of commercial property, and it doesn't have a whole lot of economic impact. I mean, is that something you guys think is a mistake to think of it that way?
A couple of things. One is looking at the values of Manhattan properties, office buildings, residential rental buildings, looking at recent sales and their taxes at the time of the sale still show that 2 to 2.5% of value, which is much lower than Class 1. So the point is, that's where I think the burden is. I mean, we recognize that there are problems with the valuation system and the comparison of market value to tax levy burden because of the methodology that the city uses to assess market value for income-producing properties. We've moved away from that in terms of our analysis to kind of come to a more sales-based approach. And even when you look at a sales-based approach and compare it to Class 1, whose values seem to be correct, because we checked those as well, that the taxes as a percentage of the value based upon sales is still much higher for those properties.
I'm inclined to be worried much more about commercial property in the outer boroughs than I am in core Manhattan. Is that one of the things that REBNY thinks about in the course of all this?
I think, starting out looking at what we know and whether these inequities hold up as you look at the boroughs and what the inequities are in the boroughs. I know looking at some other analysis that we've seen, there certainly seems to be a disproportionate tax burden on Staten Island and the Bronx compared to other boroughs for similar properties. So there are those kinds of inequities within the system, as well as the ones that we've seen in our properties that our members have.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask you just one question about the changing market that seems to be going on? We heard the hotel, we heard 2 people from the hotel industry talk about what in effect is either overbuilt or overextended or whatever the issue might be. In other boroughs we've gone to, people have raised the issue of retail. Could you address that in any way as someone who walks around Manhattan and looks constantly at empty retail establishments? What is your sense of the ability of commercial property owners to turn over their income-producing property?
A couple of things. One, I think hotels are a different class of property, and valuing them, I think, as Ray tried to get at earlier, trying to value the property separate from the business is not a science. It's a bit of an art, and there's methodologies to do that, but that doesn't mean it's simple or easy. The question of retail, I think the issue is that the burden is becoming enormous. It's on rental properties, it's on retail properties, and the question is that sustainable? And the other concern is that if, so you rent a single-family taxpayer retail, let's assume the rent is $1,000 a foot. So now you're going to pay 30% of that in taxes. So now that property is going to pay $300 a foot in taxes. That tenant leaves, that value doesn't fall down to zero quickly. It stays pretty high. And so now as you try to re-rent that space that has a high tax burden, it makes it difficult. But the question of retail is a little more complicated than just the property tax, although the property tax is a driving force that is unavoidable as those taxes go up. And so it is a concern how you separate that out and how you tax that differently. That's not easy and it is complicated. But I think it is a factor in some of the vacancies we are seeing. But I think there are other factors that account for those vacancies, not the least of which is internet sales.
Prices are sticky down.
Yes, but prices seem to just be sticky downward, to use an economist's phrase.
No doubt.
Rents seem to be sticky downwards.
As the retail brokers who are members, retail rents are declining. And they're declining rapidly and significantly. Can
you provide any data to us?
We will reach out to our retail. I think we provided some of that data yesterday to the hearing that was on the Small Business Job Survival Act.
Okay. Good. We'd appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh,
yes. Robert Nelson.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you
Over there.
for this opportunity. I am the treasurer of a 5-unit co-op in Brooklyn. Our property taxes have been increasing at a faster rate than any other expense. In 2011, they accounted for 60% of our total costs. This year, they account for 66% of our costs. If the expense curve continues as is, 71% of our costs will be going to property taxes at the end of the decade in 2021. Other costs, like insurance, have been going up over the decade too, just not as fast. The increase in our assessed value is capped at 30% over every 5 years. But our property value, as determined by the city, has more than doubled. So we will never reach a point where our assessment is limited not by the 30% cap, but by the property value. The 30% cap, which of course averages 6% a year, means that the increase in our taxes exceed inflation by nearly a factor of 3. In our building live middle-class people who are doing well and are very glad to have lived for decades in a terrific neighborhood in the greatest city. Most of us work for nonprofits or public employers or are or soon will be retired, but none of us is getting raises of 6% a year. Basically, for us, the cap is too damn high. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Okay, the next group is Nitzan Ben-Horan, John Ames, Lois McCarthy, Jessica Agulo, and Natasha Herrick. So Nitza Ben-Horan.
Good evening. I am a New Yorker. I'm a co-op owner. I don't speak here for co-op owners. I own a small business. I saved some money. I retired by owning a few small buildings in Harlem. I want to talk about the high cost of operating small buildings, which is something that I rarely hear people talking about. While it's true that big buildings have much higher taxes, in small buildings, the operating expenses per unit are much higher. I'm not so concerned about the present, I'm going to be honest. My concern is about the compounding of the increases and what it will be in 15 years and 20 years, and also how it could affect the housing stock in the city. Keep in mind that although it's not a really verified statistics, if you want to see people who pay low rents without the protection of rent stabilization, you would normally find them in small buildings. Small building owners were usually less sophisticated, tend to charge less, and tend to increase the rents less. The only out that a small building owner has, and I think somebody mentioned it before, when there is a large increase in tax, there's two outs. One out is to sell it, and somebody will come, usually it will be a wealthier, more sophisticated owner, will start working the rents. And the other out, which is not discussed here, is that a lot of these small buildings, especially mine, are sitting on prime real estate. Yeah. I could make much more money converting all my buildings to condos. I would be a very wealthy person than renting them to young people for 10, 15, 20% below market. So I'm actually, unlike most people, I'm not here to complain. I'm here to express a concern about the future and about the hidden power of compound interest. And what will you do when a four-family that's today tax looks reasonable will be 40, 50,000? I'm going to tell you what happened. That four-family will become a four-family condo because it will be easier for four people to pay $12,000 a year than it will be for one owner who has to repair boilers, who has to get sanitation fines. And it's very difficult to operate small buildings. They have no economies of scale. It will be very difficult for these small owners to hold on to these buildings. So I'm not complaining about the present. I think the present is still more or less sustainable. It's very hard to run small buildings. One boiler breakdown, and you can lose a year of income. I'm not here to exaggerate or to understate or overstate anything. But my future is what will happen to these very small buildings that not only house tenants at lower rents, but for instance, there's another thing that people rarely talk about, is that there's a lot of immigrants in the city, people who are uneducated, who cannot have sophisticated jobs, that live off these small buildings. They have no other way to survive but the rent on these small buildings. And these are the people that don't drain the city resources with rent stabilization and lawsuit and DHCR and all these things, but at the same time provide affordable housing without any incentive. And they very, very often don't even pass on the increases. I know myself, I don't pass the increases. Once you get into my building, you get into my building at market rate, but if you came in at $1,800 and the rent went up to $2,200, your increase is going to be $35. You're not going to get a $400 increase. And there is thousands and thousands of owners like me. Okay. And I think that's a housing stock that we have to really consider and protect, because this is one housing stock that does not rely on the city resources to provide reasonable rents. Small buildings have usually also small apartments. They house a lot of single people who have one income and not two income. They house most of the couples, young couples who come to this city, they finish college, they almost always would live in small buildings. Okay. So I'm not here to complain, actually, my tax is too high. I'm not in that point of view. I just want us to think how we make sure that 20 years from now, it's still the case.
Yeah,
that you survive.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. We appreciate hearing that small building owner perspective. John Ames.
Everybody having fun? Thank you all for being so patient and taking the time. I think you've heard a few versions tonight of the issues some tenants of Class 2 properties have. So I'll just give you a few statistics. I'm an owner. I'm actually the largest shareholder, a board member of a 20-unit building in the West Village. It's 6 floors. It's 128 years old. The tax bill has gone up on average over the past 10 years by about 8% a year. Our assessed value has gone up by a little more than 8%. If you look at the value of my apartment, which is something I have access to and can look at historically, it's gone up by a rate of about half that over this time. Our tax bill is about 50% of our expenses. We literally do not have money to make serious repairs that are needed to our building, the roof, chimneys, other things. Pretty much everything gets eaten by the tax bill, and then we pay our super. We have things like the exterminator, and it's really just maintenance and upkeep. So tax is really, really serious for us. I think there's probably two things, and you've heard versions of this tonight, so I'm not going to try and belabor them, but there are serious considerations with Class 2 building. One, the assessment of value that we're being taxed on does not track at all what the value is. If you look in the tax code and you see the methodology for how the value is being assessed, it suggests this is an income-producing asset or a cash flow-producing asset. I can assure you we produce no cash flow, no income. I think someone would struggle to get financing on this building, let alone make a profit off of it in the state it's in today. The other point is there's an enormous disparity between the way Class 1 properties and Class 2 properties are assessed. We're in a neighborhood where there are many Class 1 properties in the West Village. You probably could convert this whole building to a Class 1 property if you had enough money and patience, and the tax bill would go down significantly. That makes no sense. That's something that really needs to be fixed with this system. Beyond that, being a 20-unit building where basically a fifth of the tenants sit on the board and make decisions, it's something that's not run like a big co-op. It's not run like a business. We're being taxed and really facing the financial burdens of 200-unit or 300-unit co-op buildings that employ large staffs and can conduct all sorts of maintenance and other activities. We don't have that luxury. We don't have that capability at all with the income we produce. Just to add, there's people that have lived in our building, lived in the West Village their whole life. There's 2 people who moved out recently because of the maintenance increases we've had to assess, and they were very upset to do so because they were basically priced out of the neighborhood. We've applied basically 100% of our maintenance increases over the past few years to tax increases. So I think our hope is that we can sort of bring our building's finances back in line and get some more parity between Class 1 and Class 2 properties.
And have you challenged it all?
Yeah, we do it every year. There's zero transparency. It's, if you consider the tax bill getting shot by firing squad, challenging it is they let you smoke a cigarette while you get shot.
Okay. Ooh, that's an awful image. Thank you. Mr. Ames.
Tax Commission, a little bit.
Lois McCarthy.
What am I doing here?
Do I make? I guess I just, okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Good evening. I'm an Upper West Sider in a condo that converted from a rental building in 2000, and we bought in 2001. And at the time, we assumed, as everything, common interest determines your taxes, your maintenance, your share of assessments, etc. And the first year, the sponsor paid the building's taxes, and we were all billed individually because they were getting it all put together or straightened out. And then a few years later, I noticed there was just a total unfairness even within our building. And then I pursued and found out that this is citywide situation, and it has to do with a memorandum produced in 2007 from by the Department of Finance that all co-ops and condos use their percentage of common interest to determine your real estate taxes. And that's condos and co-ops from 2007 on that it was specifically dealing with. Well, we bought in 2001, so we were not in that memorandum, so to speak. And as a result, what the sponsor did, the first 5 units that were sold, the first 5 of us who bought, he shifted a lot of the rental units taxes onto us, 12% on top of what we should have been paying in taxes. And as these units were sold, he never changed that. So these rental units, I have the sheet, for example, my common interest is, well, there's residential common interest and then there's common interest. For tax purposes, I believe you use residential common interest. My residential common interest is 3.7675. Yeah, 3.7675. However, my taxes, I'm taxed at 5.6998. I'm taxed at almost 2% over my common interest. And and there's 5 of us, only 5 of us in this building who have that burden. That burden, the overtaxation on our part is $100,000 a year between 5 of us. So we're paying our regular taxes and we're paying our neighbors $100,000 of theirs. And it's caused a lot of anger and and I think that memorandum should be revised to say all condos and co-ops should be taxed by their common interest, not just since 2007, because we're caught in that. And the city has been wonderful. We go down, we talk to them, they understand it. They said they can't do anything about that, which doesn't make sense to me. Especially since this has gone on for almost 20 years now.
Yeah. Okay, that's that's good for us to hear, and we will certainly put that on our list, okay?
Okay.
Thank you very much, Ms. McCarthy. Jessica Agulo?
This contract showing about the...
Am I mispronouncing that?
And the Secretary General, sure.
Jessica? Ms. Agulo? Maybe I'm mispronouncing it, 626 Washington Street? No? Natasha Herrick?
Okay.
Ms. Herrick?
Hi, here. Hi, I'm Natasha. I live in an apartment in Midtown East. I'm actually a member of an affordable living task force through Manhattan Young Democrats. I just wanted to say thank you all for being here tonight and all of your work on the commission. And I basically just wanted to say I'm asking that you keep renters in mind and involved throughout this entire process. Not to say that you're not already doing that, but just to emphasize that. That includes thinking about how any reform will impact the long-term rental market. If there's a way to help renters understand what landlords sort of spoke about here, how it can impact their own rental bill. And then also, if there could be like an actual bill so that they can see that. And then also I found out at the last minute about these property tax reform commission hearings, so it'd be great if there are other ways sort of get that message out there, and I'm definitely happy to spread the word. I posted it on my Facebook last night, letting people know, but I think just getting more people involved here at a hearing, not even necessarily to testify, but to hear what's going on. I personally learned a lot tonight, and I think it would just be helpful to have more people here to hear innovative ideas like the computer scientists who came by. I've also not typically felt sympathy for landlords, but it was interesting to hear that new perspective. So thanks for being here, and that was my thoughts.
Thank you. We don't hear enough from the tenants, and any ideas that you have about how we can reach those folks, we would very much appreciate. So thank you for using your Facebook. Pat Gallagher. Mr. or Ms. Gallagher, Borough Street. Francesco Navarro, or I may not be reading, West 169th Street. Francesco, I believe it's Navarro. No? Susan Lawn.
Great on the pronunciation.
Sorry.
I'm here 40 years, and the building I'm in is a complex of Title I housing behind the old Coliseum. The land we're on was tenements being torn down, and it was really meant to be affordable housing. Well, because of the Time Warner Center, one-bedroom apartments are selling close to $1 million. Two-bedroom apartments are an easy $1.5 million. The concerns are, I'm on the board, are what are you looking at in terms of us planning? Nobody has asked about the abatement that might expire in 2019. Is that part of this picture, or is that separate?
The co-op and condo abatement that is up for upping, I guess, in this current legislative session. So we will be looking at that. We may very well make recommendations about that.
Do you think it will continue or be part of this total reform?
That's a decision that the state legislature makes, and they will make a decision on the co-op and condo abatement during the legislative session.
It's not.
So it's unlikely that we will be out by that time.
Okay. Because of location, and even though we're not high-end, my questions would be, are you considering things in taxes like Midtown being behind the now Time Warner Center, near a subway stop? Are the taxes that you're looking at based on surroundings? Might we get hit harder because of that?
So the current tax system would look at comparables in the neighborhood, right? So, I mean, we haven't made any recommendations yet. So you're asking me what our recommendations will be. We don't know yet. We're still discussing all that. We're still hearing from you all.
Okay, because we're looking at congestion pricing, commercial rent stabilization, spending money on tertiary attorneys every year. There are a lot of things that are affecting our budget, and of course taxes is at least 55% of our budget. But okay, just wanted,
Can you give
I'd
us
like to follow up on where you're going with the items I mentioned, because they all affect us.
Can you give us a sense of, first, how big your building is? And
It's 600, well, it's 575 units.
575.
Yeah.
And what have your taxes, how much have your taxes increased in recent years?
I don't have that number, but they're going high. And for those of us who bought, when it became a co-op in 1987 became a co-op, it was built in late 50s, 57.
I see.
It's hurting the people who bought originally, and of course, you have to sell, and if you can't afford it anymore. Thank you.
We appreciate hearing from you. So let me just say who is up next. Sheila Gordon, David Lopez, Darren Lipman, Karen Wohl, Ab Wohl, Adam Henichi, maybe, and Fred Terrell. So Ms. Gordon, Sheila Gordon. Is Ms. Gordon here?
Yeah,
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. It's very hard to see out there.
I'm sure. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Great. There are a lot of things that have been said, and we'll try not to be repetitious. I'd start out by saying that my name is Sheila Gordon, and I am part of a neighborhood organization of brownstone owners called the Friends of West 95th Street. There are 5 of us here tonight who've been here the whole time, and we care very much about these issues. I think we all agree that how we are very impressed by your sincerity and seriousness in dealing with this, and we thank you very much for this. We have many different interests on our block, but I think that one of the things that we bring to you, and one of my neighbors has already brought to you, is the question of having your considerations involve what is the future of the city? What is the city going to look like? What are neighborhoods going to look like? Are they all going to be the same and boring? Or will we be able to sustain the diversity and richness and character that has been part of New York City? And those of us who live in brownstone blocks are very proud of what we have created and what we think is important to sustain. And we hope that you will keep this in mind as you shape and refine new tax policy. And there have been a lot of changes in our neighborhood, and I'm sure in other brownstone neighborhoods, as we've heard. But in particular, we think that we hope that you will try to preserve the iconic nature of brownstone communities. And for us, we see the importance of favoring owner occupancy, recognizing that a brownstone owner like myself, for example, who happens to have 5 units but lives in more than half of the building, is different from a small building that is 5 units and makes rental income on that. To recognize, as many people have said much better than I will, that many people in buildings like this have lived there for many years, have raised families there for many years, and have not sold their properties but may have to as taxes continue at the rate that they are. And then a very brief background. Our buildings, brownstone buildings on the west side, were built in 1890. And we have seen the rise and fall and ebb and flow. What changed in the late 60s, urban renewal, transformed this and encouraged and nurtured brownstones. And as we hope that you will do as you do that. Many, many of our neighbors were people who were the pioneers who came in the 1970s, renovated their buildings and transformed them and are still there and have often been 3-family residences. We want to sustain that diversity that we have that has brought us to be a very strong and powerful neighborhood. We do many things in our neighborhood. We have written a history of our block. We have got historic replica lampposts for our block. We have a Halloween celebration that draws thousands of people, children from all over the city. We do Christmas caroling. We know each other. And we have a sense of community, and we hope that you will use your resources to continue to nurture neighborhoods that add this vitality. Thank you.
We appreciate that. Are you in a historic district?
Yes, we're in a landmark district, right?
Okay.
The Upper West Side Historic District.
Okay, thank you.
And I think there's a colleague of yours, David Lopez.
Hi, good evening. Sheila and I, together with a couple other people, run the Friends of West 95th Street, which is, as she said, an organization that represents about 35 brownstones on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. I'd like to thank everybody on the committee. You guys are involved in a very complicated project, and the thoughtfulness that you're approaching it with, I think, is incredibly commendable.
Thank you for appreciating that.
I'm sure you don't get a lot of appreciation. As a collection of small properties, I think there are ways in which we think the current system works and ways in which it doesn't. Brownstones in our neighborhood are mostly owner-occupied. Some of them are single-family. Many of them have between 2 and 5 rental units. As owner-occupied buildings, obviously these are not commercial enterprises. We're not engaged in a profit-making enterprise. And the tax burden that we have it is what it is. We realize that we benefit as mostly Class 1 properties from the current system, but the idea of increasing that tax burden is extremely troubling to all of us, especially given the rate at which our taxes have increased since 2000. But we do see certain issues that we think are worth talking about. First, any property tax system that has more than one tax rate is going to create incentives, and some of those incentives are planned, some of them are accidental. We think that the incentives should be crafted in a way that meet clear policy objectives, and in order to have those policy objectives, I think it's incumbent on either you or the city or the state to clearly define what those objectives ought to be. We think one of those objectives ought to be encouraging owner occupancy of buildings. There are numerous studies that show that owner-occupied buildings contribute to stability, they contribute to safety, they contribute to investment in the neighborhood. And we think that's a goal that's encouraging. Second, although the overall architecture of the system certainly, as I said, I think benefits Class 1 properties, the system is amazingly complex. The categories within Class 1 are numerous. The categories within other classes, I think, are also numerous, but I'm less familiar with those. There is a maze of abatement programs and exemptions. The whole thing is a bit of a mess. And that mess breeds a sense of uncertainty and suspicion among owners. It is very difficult for one owner to understand why his or her building, which looks very similar to a building down the block, has a very, very different tax rate. Now, there may be good reasons for that, but it's hard to understand, and it creates the feeling of unfairness, even if there isn't actual unfairness. So we would definitely support a system that is easier to understand and is more transparent, and possibly is aligned with clearly stated policy objectives. The last thing I'll say is that several mentions have been made of, or several questions have been asked by the commission of individual speakers. Have you challenged your assessment? That's an easy question to ask. It's a very hard question to answer. Challenging an assessment is time-consuming. It takes a certain amount of expertise. If you don't do it yourself, it requires a great investment in experts to help you challenge the assessment. And what was said by one of the other speakers is absolutely right. It's a fool's errand, because if you challenge the assessment and you get it pulled back this year, you will go through exactly the same process next year, because lo and behold, your assessment will go up next year by an amount which is greater than the reduction you got, and so you're back where you started. I think that is unfair. It does favor owners of larger properties who are better able to navigate that system.
Can I,
Thank you.
Mr. Lopez, I just want to clarify one thing. When you talk about having the clear policy objective of encouraging owner-occupied, are you distinguishing between owner-occupied and rental, or are you distinguishing between out of non-resident owner occupants, or non-resident owners, I should say?
I am focused on small properties that have an owner living in the building. It may have additional rental units, it may not. So for example, I think to take a totally different paradigm, if you have a large co-op building, I think co-op buildings that are owned and occupied by the people who own the units, they're occupied by the people who own the units, have a big impact, a very favorable impact on the neighborhood around them. When they are occupied by people who either aren't there or who are subletting or renting, I think there's a very different impact.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Darren Lipman. I come from a union, I know the show.
Good evening. My topic is property tax increases on rent-stabilized property, representing myself. The primary driver for annual property tax increases is the increase in the property's market value. My issue is how market value is determined. If you were to purchase a solely owned occupied property, the value is based on the appraised value, square feet, number of rooms, location, land size, etc. If you were to purchase a rental property, the market value is based on the ratio of operating income to asset value, better known as the capitalization rate or cap rate. The problem is DOF is increasing taxes on my rent-stabilized property based on appraised value, not the more relevant increase in operating income. I've owned my property for about 6 years and seen my taxable market value double, while my stabilized rents have gone up 8%. Let's restate that. You have increased my taxable value by 100%, while allowed rent increases went up a mere 8%. We need fairness in taxation. Stop penalizing those that provide affordable housing. The taxable market rate for a stabilized rental property must be commensurate with the increase in operating income. I'm personally for a PA-deterrent tax, a new tax on Airbnb units, and relief for small retail businesses. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ray?
Yeah, can I just follow up on that, because it's one of the puzzles in my mind. So you're saying that your tax has been going up not because your, net income, right, has been going up from your
I have a
income.
Class 1 property.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're a Class 1 property, so your income is going up because of comparable sales. Okay, I understand, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, Karen Wall.
Hi. I'm here, I'm just a co-op owner at 308 East 79th Street. And I came because I was concerned. I didn't know it was this kind of formal hearing, although thank you, and I'm learning a lot. But I was told by board members that they went to similar co-ops in the neighborhood, block by block, building by building, and found that our appropriation of taxes wasn't the same as a similar building. And every year they have to hire a lawyer. I'm sure he gets a percentage of it, and they go through the whole thing. And we're looking to, it's a building from 1929. We still have things we have to improve, and why they're saying our maintenance due to the taxes may go up 17%, which I thought is very high, especially I take out of a local paper, it says the values on the Upper East Side are going down, so why would the tax rates go up? So I'm just coming as a concerned co-op owner, that's all, and I don't know what you could do, but...
We can listen. And are you hearing this survey of other condo buildings, are you hearing that you have an assessed market value, you have an estimated market value that's higher than theirs?
Yes, they went building by building, block by block, the president and a board member, and they couldn't figure out, I mean, our building's mostly one-bedrooms, and why ours was higher.
That if the president has that data, has what he or she learned, that would be very helpful.
Who
if they
do
could submit
send
it to.
Who do they?
If you go on the NewYorkCity.gov website and you put in Advisory Commission on Property Tax, there's a way that you can then upload the document into that.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And
Thank
now
you, Ms. Wall.
Abe Wall.
That's my wife.
Yeah.
We came here because the building asked somebody to represent them. I'm not on the co-op board. I do help them. The building is 1928, mostly one-family residence. We've done a lot of improvements because since we've been there, our tax rate has gone from about 45 to maybe 54%, which is significant. We've cut down some of the staff. We've automated our elevators. We've put in new boilers, a whole bunch of things, but it's going to be tough to maintain it. I'm retired. My wife's retired. Most of the people in our building get up at 7 o'clock and go to work every day in the one-bedrooms. Much of this is like, we're the home of the 2nd Avenue subway. We lived through the torment of the 2nd Avenue subway with everything that went wrong. Since then, 22 buildings are going up. I'm sure most of those 22 buildings have tax abatements. we've been paying for 90 years. You know what I'd like to see? I'd like to see that on our 100th anniversary, maybe we get a tax abatement after we've paid taxes for 100 years. I hope I can afford to live there 10 years from now based on the increase of the taxes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wall.
And then Adam Hein, I hope I get it right, Heinisch or Heinisch, from the same building. Adam, yeah, 308 East 79. Nobody? Okay. Fred Terrell.
Thank you very much. My name is Fred Terrell, and I'm a Class 1 building owner on 12 West 95th Street, and a member of the Friends of West 95th Street. You've heard from some of my colleagues already. I want to thank you all for your commitment to public service. It takes a lot to be out here doing what you do, and that's not lost on us. My fellow members, I don't want to repeat what's been said. I'll be brief if I can. My fellow members and I hope the city maintains the current distinction and advantage between our Class 1 owner-occupied properties and other commercial properties. My wife and I bought in 2000. That makes us a newbie in my group and on our street. The neighborhood was still in the midst of a transition. A flower box with pretty flowers would last a day before crack users would take the flowers. Things are much better now because all of my fellow Class 1 owners banded together to provide needed stability. And that's what happens in an owner-occupied environment. A few quick things to mention about our relationship as taxpayers. We are all partners in it together. The services provided by the city are plentiful. We respect them, need them, but we also help pay for them. We appreciate ongoing needed clarity and simplicity in the current system, but most of all, maintaining a system of fundamental fairness, which we think the current system in part addresses. We know there's always need for change and improvement, but we hope that distinction that separates out Class 1 owners is maintained. I would point out or recognize many of the unpaid responsibilities that we assume as homeowners, and we come out of pocket to keep the streets clean and safe for our children in the neighborhood, whether they're owners or not. We take responsibility for them. In our case, it's a pronounced responsibility. As my friend and neighbor mentioned, we throw a Halloween party each year, 10 years in a row, for our community. It's not for our block, it's for our neighborhood. It includes the people on the block, but it also includes some neat buildings and some pretty stressed out public housing where kids from those communities who would not have the opportunity to go to Halloween and get out of their home have it, because we do that, and we do it out of pocket, and we do it eagerly because we view ourselves as not only community activists but community philanthropists. And I say that's an important thing. I think that we have built a community and we want to maintain it because we think it's our duty to maintain it on behalf of the city, but also we recognize that that's an expensive cost, and to the extent that property taxes increase, we'll be able to do less of it, and that would be a shame. The last thing I would say is whatever you decide to do in the future, provide a proper time for us to ease into the impact of whatever form you provide, so we can thoughtfully and prudently run our financial lives for the benefit and greater benefit of ourselves and the greater benefit of our neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Fred, thank you for coming out. I just had a question. I think your neighbor made reference to some variation in taxes within the block. Is that a factor?
It's not that I know of, not that I'm aware of, Mr. Knuckles. I don't know of that variation. I defer to my colleagues. I think, David, I don't know if you'd like to speak to that. Okay. Throw out a lifeline here.
Well, it's not a scientific study, but based on the city records we were able to find on our block, among brownstones, the variation in tax liability, I think, spans between $30,000 at the low end and 75-ish at the high end.
If you could give us that data, that would be very helpful.
Sure, happy to.
And I assume it has something to do with the size of the buildings?
No, they're all roughly the same size. They're in different classes depending on...
Subdivided more?
Some are subdivided
Yeah.
more, that's right. Some are in very strange subcategories. So for example, there is a specific category for converted rooming house, and the history behind that is way beyond my understanding.
Yeah.
But it's very complicated, and
Good point.
figuring out the rhyme or reason to it is difficult. And that's why I said I think that breeds a sense that there is unfairness in the system, although God knows who or why there would be any unfairness.
Sure. Right. Okay, that's very helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I just want to make sure that we didn't miss anyone. So I have a Francisco Navarro
We have a raised hand, I think.
going once.
Somebody's...
Raised hand.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Just one second,
Microphone so you
let me go through. Pat Gallagher, Barrow Street, going once. Jessica Agulo, Washington Street, going once. Gail Steinberg, 41st Street, going once, and Adam Hinich, going once. Ma'am, you are the computer genius. Do you want to give us any brief final suggestions? 30 seconds.
I would like to speak about SCREE, which is a completely different subject.
About what?
SCREE.
SCREE. So there's something called the fair market rent, which is the HUD comes out every year with a number of what would be a fair rent in Manhattan, in Philadelphia, everywhere in the United States. But there are some regulated tenants that pay less than fair market rent. In my building, for example, small brownstone, there's a lady, one of the people pays $600 for a studio. And the fair market rent for studio in Manhattan is $1,100. So I think that, and the same as SCREE, that gives the ways to poor people to be paid out of the property tax. I think that the difference between the fair market rent and the ridiculous rent that some people pay should be also credited from the property tax instead of me personally being responsible for that money. It's just not realistic for somebody to pay $600 for rent, and it's not considered anywhere except in my pocket.
We understand the problem. Yeah, sweet. Thank you very much for bringing that to our attention. Okay, we really appreciate your coming out tonight, your sharing your concerns and your experiences and your suggestions with us, and we will get to work trying to figure out how to do the right thing, and be back to you, and we'll need your comments and your reactions at that point. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And then see if you still like us.
We're coming to the Halloween party.
Yeah, really.
This was all, said you understood.
That's wrong.